Hello and welcome to Roll Call. This is a limited series diving into the concept of classes, roles or archetypes within Kingdom Death. The first video went through the history of it and talked about why roles are relevant for a dungeon crawler or a boss battler, which is a sub-genre of dungeon crawlers, and laid a lot of the groundworks. Here we're going to be talking about the tank, which I've chosen to cover first out of all of the main three archetypes, the others being damage and support, because it is, in all honesty, the most important role. And the reason for that is our lovely little tank, here she is always going to be required. What I mean by that is you don't really get to choose if there's a tank in the game or not. There is always going to be a tank. And for the reasons of that, we should come over here to where the monster is actually located and talk about the decks. So, monsters break down into three elements. You've got the AI deck, the hit location deck, and then the various traits, moods, and how big the monster is and where it is located on the board. Now, in respect to these two decks, as I discussed in the archetype video, you can consider them to land into archetypes of their own. The hit location deck plays a little bit like a tank, in particular a very reactive tank. If you don't attack the monster, you don't ever have to draw hit location cards, or if you attack the monster and score automatic wounds, same thing. The AI deck, on the other hand, this is the monster's active behaviour. This is how the monster is going to be progressing towards winning by eliminating your units. And the monster gets to do that because it gets to draw AI cards at the start of its turn. Sometimes one, sometimes more. That means every turn somebody is getting hit, so somebody has to tank that hit. As such, the tank is very much the most important piece in your hunt party, and while you might play more of a hybrid style, which I'll talk about when we get to the videos on bruisers, off tanks, you're still going to be running one, maybe even two builds that are dedicated towards being able to take these hits in one way or another, or you're going to have to be rotating your survivors around and spreading out the hits because nobody can really properly tank. We care more about having a proper tank within this. We're not looking to spread it out between all of the survivors if we can avoid that. Instead, we're looking to concentrate most of our defenses into one place. And the reason that is an advantage is because of a number of different factors. First of all, as mentioned, the monster forces someone to tank every turn. That is just the nature of it. But secondly, specialization breeds strength. Just like in real life, the more specialized someone becomes in something, the more parts of that become automatic, the more effective they become at it, and actually kind of the less energy they have to expend on doing it. And all of that applies off into here. Now, one of the other big advantages though is if you step up and you say, I'm going to be playing the tank, I'll be taking the hits, what you're doing is you are taking charge of the AI deck. You are saying this big attack that the monster's going to do every turn, and the AI cards are deliberately big and powerful. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. Well, that's a pressure off everyone else. So not only are you now specialising in dealing with the AI deck, other players can specialise in handling other things, such as dealing damage or providing a supporting role for you and the damage dealers, or who knows what else. They may be running something very specialised. Effectively, you've taken an area of the game and you've said, this is my domain, I'm going to be the lead on this, I'm going to handle it, and that helps everyone. One last really big advantage is if you play a tank, you can actually interact with just half of the monster. Because if you attack, you've got to draw hit location cards. If you're not attacking, you don't have to draw hit location cards. So you're, instead of being like, I've got to get through here to remove these, you're saying, I'm not bothering with this, I am just over here and I'm just dealing with this. All of my gear grid is devoted to dealing with this. Now, in truth, you're always going to be attacking at least a little bit, because you need to do weapon proficiency ticks that requires attacking and dealing wounds. And as we'll look at, it's particularly important for you to progress one weapon proficiency in specific, the tank's signature weapon, the shield. So that is, you can't entirely bypass the hit location deck, at least not until you've gained shield mastery, but you are reducing your interactions with it as much as you can. So that allows you to spend your armor points, your defenses, more on the AI deck. And also, block is a way of spending your activation that just the monster can't get any scaling from, and in fact reduces their scaling. And what I mean by that is, the hit location deck can be thought of as the way that the monster scales against multiple opponents. Every time you attack it, you could draw one or more cards from the hit location deck, and each one of them has a small chance of hitting you with a punish. It can't punish you if you're not doing that, so this is why the tank can be extra effective, because not only are you blunting the AI deck by being prepared to take it and set up for that, you're also neutering the hit location deck and neutering the monster's scaling, and that will have an impact on how much easier the monster is to deal with. It's something as well we'll talk about in the support roles, because you can play pure supports who don't attack the monster at all, or maybe they attack it once to provide weapon progression and then just sit it out for the rest of the time. So that's a really powerful way of scaling. That's why I personally think tanks are the most important class. Finally, just a quick note, tanks are actually quite hard to get to grips with, but once you've got the hang of it, you have less things to think about than others, although you do always need to be paying attention. So I would class this as a high skill floor and medium skill level class. So difficult to get into, but not too difficult to maintain, especially if you get towards the pure tank status, where you're now just sitting back and you're taking an observational view from behind your shield. Okay, basic principles done. Let's talk about what the tank is thinking about and doing in each of our phases. We're going to start with the hunt phase, because it's actually the least discussion required. We're then going to move on to the showdown phase, and then finally we'll go through the settlement phase, what you should be taking charge of there, and also talk about the best gear, or good examples of gear to let you keep your eye out for what's going to really help you tank. So, hunt phase. The hunt phase is effectively Kingdom Death's dungeon crawl phase. As we all know, you move up this track and you will be having encounters rolled on a chart, or perhaps from cards specific to a monster, and then they're going to do things. Now, the hunt phase has two functions. First of all, it adds kind of variety on the way in, so it means you just don't turn up immediately with the same power level every single time. You might be a little bit weaker because you've taken some damage in on the way, or maybe even a bit stronger because somehow you've gained a piece of gear that's very relevant and useful, like say a steel sword or a mask. It's variable. It is like a dungeon crawl, but it's condensed down to just moving along on this track. Now, you don't have a lot of control over this, but the things to note as a tank is, number one, bringing along gear that does stuff on the hunt phase, it's not your job. The reason for that is most tank builds require an armor set, a shield, a weapon, and monster grease. So you are just really squeezed for slots already. You've got one space left, and ideally you're devoting that to some other defensive tool or to help you secure shield progression. So that's one of the first things you need to be saying to anyone when you're building your gear grid, is you're not the priority for grabbing this kind of gear. Sickles, whips, etc. But you do want them on the hunt phase because they can help provide the big important thing for you, which is preserving your resources. So your goal on the hunt is to spend as few of your resources as possible. That's survival, armor points, insanity, bleed tokens, things like that. you generally want to bear in mind whenever you have a choice, which you don't always have a choice. Sometimes it's a role, you have to deal with the consequences. But when you have a choice, you should be weighing up the benefits versus the costs. I usually think interacting with something that can give you a resource is typically worth it, especially early on. Later on, maybe less so. Basic resources become less valuable the further you get into the campaign and the more that monster resources scale up. But that's what you want to hold in mind. Is this worth it? What's going to happen to me if it goes badly? Can I afford to lose those things? If not, then you should be putting your hands up saying, I'm not interacting with this. This is not my job. I need my armor points to spend on the AI deck. So fairly straightforward. You'll also want to keep an eye out for gaining innovations like Song of the Brave, which helps protect resources even further, survival and similar. Okay, so now let us get on to the Showdown Phase, which is the longest phase most of the time. Settlement Phase can be very, very long, but that depends on how much you want to engage with it. Now, your role as the tank is... It's not just to be the meat shield, although that is a big part of it. It's also to be one of maybe two people who pay close attention to the hit location deck. Now, as this is your opponent, as this, you declared yourself the nemesis of the hit location deck, the AI deck. The AI deck. It is important that you pay attention. Now, monster design in Kingdom Death is fascinating because you never face the same monster twice. It's mathematically really unlikely because of how decks work. We have a curated selection of random picks from various different tiers of cards that make up the AI deck, and they're in a random order. We also have a hit location deck in a random order, and every time we complete a pass-through of the AI deck, which I'll call a lap, or same with the hit location deck, a lap being triggered when you hit the trap, you get a new randomization. Now what that means is no matter how much you may think that every monster of a given species is the same, they're really not. Not at all. Now, it's really sweet. It's such a great mechanic of this. I've never faced the same white lion as you. I think I can say that, and I'm probably right with it. Even on the legendaries, which have a preset deck, there's still randomization in their order of both of their decks. So it's very unlikely I've faced the same legendary as you. Now, that's the way the probabilities work. They're incredible. There's a lot to think about. Now, what that means is, while you can get a good grip on how the species works as a whole, you can never be completely sure how an individual monster of that species is going to behave. Because unless you have a way of looking at the entire AI deck at the start, or a way of scouting through it every turn, such as the Rawhide Headband, you don't know what it's doing. And that's the monster's big strength, is it's concealing these moves. You could know every move in the game, off by heart, but without being able to look at the deck, you don't know exactly which card is coming next, unless it's like a duration or something. But you can get good at understanding how the species behaves as a whole, in particular its preferred target, so the target it's most likely to attack, and also any really scary cards or really weak cards. I call these peaks and troughs, like a peak in danger and a trough, a lull, a safe place. And that is something that you should be paying attention to, and hopefully your supporters as well, in order to free up your damage dealers with more mental space so they can concentrate on getting in the right place for attacks and dealing their attacks in the best order and handling things. Because I'm going to say it, like, damage dealers are the easiest class to start playing. They are the hardest class to play to a really good level, because sometimes you just have to know when to take your foot off the brake, off the throttle and put on the brake, and when to kind of like just cool down. It's very difficult to be an incredibly good damage dealer. I'm not I'm not a great damage dealer. I primarily play tanks and supports in Kingdom Death. Damage dealing just isn't my jive. I've always been a tank / support main. I like being the one who has all the armor points and takes the hits and no-sells them. It's just my preferred playstyle. Now, you can, outside of getting information via the Rawhide headband or similar, we do actually have one more really interesting and neat moment, and this is something I want you to develop as a skill if you want to be a good tank, and that is part of this paying attention to the AI deck. So at the very start of the showdown, we have a deck that is constructed of unknown cards. And we are gradually going to figure out what the monster's moveset is by the monster drawing and playing those cards, and us removing other ones as wounds. So essentially, we are curating this specific monster's behaviour. And that what you can do while that's happening is you can pay attention to what's going on. So for example here, I've actually got a monster deck that's completed its first lap for this example, and we can see it's already done a grasp. So we can think, okay, this monster does grasp, that is knockdown survivor in range, that will grab them and pull them away and isolate them. We don't want knockdown survivors, but also I have to remember that if I'm the closest survivor in range, I might get grabbed. And it's important as well to note this doesn't target in front facing, so if the damage dealers are at range 1 and you're at range 2, they are going to be taking this. So that's the kind of stuff you'd be thinking about. So if we just keep going, alright, we've got Maul. This is a terrifyingly scary card, but it doesn't do anything if nobody's grabbed and nobody's knocked down. So we now know we want to leave survivors standing wherever possible. Being laid down is bad until Maul has gone past. And so on. We're going to Claw, that's a very soft generic attack, that's great. Size Up, we've got an Intimidate. Okay, that's going to be a random threat, so we can't control the Intimidate, that's fine. Chomp, okay, this is a Headhunter, so against attacks we want to think about protecting our head a little bit more, but also it could potentially get neutered with this persistent injury. Bat Around, this is a very inaccurate attack, it's a very soft attack, so we know this here, this is not a hard card for us to tank through, especially in tall grass and with evasion. That's good to know. And then Vicious Claw. No, okay, Random Survivor. That's pretty bad. We can't control where this is going. All we can do is tell people to be out of range. So if we look at the board, we've got, this is range 7, so the support is out of range. Let's just say Alistair here is a naked support. He's just wearing a loincloth and he's got a bunch of support items. So he's been positioned over here out of range of the monster in order to avoid getting hit with Vicious Claw. That's just a few example things we're thinking of, and that's the kind of stuff you should be advising your teammates on, of being like, be aware of this and think of this. You shouldn't quarterback unless they're really unconfident and unconfident, lacking in confidence. Unless they they need your support, and I'll be honest, like if you're the owner of the game, you kind of should be playing the tank role or the support role. Let other people play damage unless they really want to play tank and support. It's just the best thing to do. And as you can see here, by taking charge of the AI deck, you can help free up people's headspace to understand the game better. But what I really wanted to get at now is this moment here. We've completed a lap of the AI deck. We have no cards left in the deck, and what we have is derived information. This is information that's not hidden, it's part of the board state. We have a full list of all the moves this monster likes to do. Vicious Claw, Bat Around, Chomp, Size Up, Claw, Maul, Grasp. That's perfect information. Now, we are not going to know once it is back here and it's shuffled up. We don't know what order they're in anymore without assistance from a Rawhide headband or similar, but we do know what moves it's going to do, and we know that, oh, Bat Around, right, that's not going to happen again. Boom, Size Up. Okay, that's the Intimidate gone. Until we get through the lap, we know that we don't have to worry about Insanity for a while. Vicious Claw. Okay, that's at least now we know the monster is more predictable for the remaining cards. There's Maul. Great, fantastic. No one was knocked down. Doesn't matter so much if someone's knocked down now, but there is still a little bit of fear in grasp. Okay, so that is something I want you to get good at if you really want to excel. Now, Kingdom Death isn't a memory game. That is all face-up information, so take record of it in whatever way you're comfortable with. If you don't like the idea of writing these down, try and memorize them. If your memory isn't great, maybe you should write them on a bit of paper or take a photo of all of the cards. Just splay them out, snap a quick photo so you have something to reference while playing. If you do feel uncomfortable with that, I would point out that first of all, Magic the Gathering, a game played at a very significant competitive level, has derived information. When someone sees what's in someone's hand through a discard spell or similar, they are allowed to write it all down on a bit of paper and cross things off as they're played. Magic Arena even goes as far as keeping the cards that are known information for both players face up in the app. So honestly, if you have a problem with recording this stuff, that's fine. This is your game, you play it how you like. But also I kind of say maybe get over it a little bit, and because at least initially while you're trying to get used to a monster, you can do well by recording things. You can even go as far as using a couple of different coloured pens and write the really scary cards in bright red or something, so they stand out and you're like, okay, we haven't seen this yet, we need to be aware of this, and note extra details. It's up to you how far you want to go, but at a minimum you want to develop this skill with your memory and be thinking about, well, how bad was this card we just drew? Was it really scary? Did it put someone in a bad position? Did it hurt me a lot? Or was it really weak? And that gave us a breathing moment to be able to do stuff. So that's pretty fantastic. It gets even better when you have a support working with your damage dealers to curate the AI deck. But that's really not your job unless you're playing a hybrid tank support. Okay. Now we're going on to the other stuff, and in order to break down that, we're going to be looking at how a monster plays its cards and gets towards its win condition in a bunch of stages, and we'll be talking about each defense along the way, what I call the gates. These are all the gates the monster has to get through to reach the juicy, soft, serious injury table where it can potentially kill you. So as I talk through this, I'm occasionally going to say, like, time to kill. What I mean by that is time to a potential kill. TTPK if you prefer. I just find TTK easier because I want to think about what's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is rolling on that severe injury table and dying. Because if my tank, if I'm gone from the board, that's one less opponent for the monster to have to scale against. That means everyone else's jobs have gotten harder, and also the toughest, the hardest target has been taken out. So I want to be thinking about my defences and how I'm going to be affecting all of that. So let's start with the very simple basics. The first thing the monster has to do to attack and damage someone is target them. Sometimes it targets everyone, but usually it will target a specific threat. Now, if it's an intimidate action, then all you can really do is roll on the chances of it happening, see what occurs. But in the case of attacks, move-in attacks, which are the most common type of way that a monster will kill survivors, they tend to target. And your step of control here is manipulating who the target will be. I.e., you want it to be you, unless for some reason you can't handle it because something's gone wrong and you're currently in damage control and you need someone else to step up. So the very first thing is learning how monsters like to target on average. The White Lion, for example, is a good place to learn because it has a lot of cards that pick closest threat or pick closest threat in facing. So that's fantastic. That brings us to positioning. So positioning is our second particularly important thing. And for example, here we have a tank that at the start of the survivor's turn has been in the ideal position for the monster's turn. But it's important to note that the White Lion sometimes runs forward off its hit location deck and it will grab whatever's in the way, it'll knock them down, it'll deal damage to them. So we can already see that once we're past the monster phase, we need to consider repositioning. A simple step to the side is often good enough because if the monster runs this way, you should still be the nearest target. but you can also dash to reposition if required, or others can make repositions, etc., as depends as required. Now, the other important and really useful part of positioning is the next layer of defense, which is the dash cancel. Once you have dash, you suddenly have a tool that you can use during flow steps to disrupt the monster's whole targeting process. For this example, we got Lucy over here, so let's point the white line at her. Right, so this is a level 2 white line. It has 7 movement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So Lucy is just in range. The monster can move up to this far. So let's say it's done random survival with Vicious Claw and it's targeted her. She now has a flow step, and she can spend a survival and dash in that flow step. And if she moves back 2 spaces, suddenly she's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 spaces away. Now the monster's already locked in its target. It doesn't matter that there are others nearer to it. It can't change its decision now. It's not a thinking person, it's a machine following its program. Its program says, go after Lucy. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it did I move it 6 or 7? 7, sorry, there we are. And it's going to stop. It can't reach Lucy. Lucy's not in the space adjacent to it, so it can't make an attack against her. So she's effectively cancelled every single attack it's doing and reduced its card down to being a move. And then she can like dash around, move around to get back into position. The tank can move up and we can reset everything really nicely. So that is a super useful tool that starts becoming relevant once you have access to dash. Some monsters will just bypass this or get around it either by they draw multiple AI cards in a turn or they have range, but you should always be sort of looking to achieve this where you can. And dashing is a big reason why monsters scale up in movement. They need that movement in order to keep up with any extra movement survivors have gained or any cheeky dashes or anything like that. Dash cancelling is why movement is so good on every survivor. In addition to just the more places you can move to, the more options you have. So, if we got past all of that, the monster's targeted you, it's reached you, and it's attacked. Its next gate it has to get through is evasion. Evasion is a passive. Basically, the monster, if it doesn't roll high enough to hit, it will miss, and that particular dice roll is neutered and does nothing. Evasion, of course, affects the dice roll. You can get evasion through things like tall grass or through pieces of gear like the monster grease or the phoenix helm. Evasion has a soft cap where +8 evasion is usually good enough for every situation. That's because most monsters have 2+ to hit at best, and it goes to a 10+. Monsters always get to hit on a 10, so that's as best as you can manage. And also, there's a little bit of diminishing returns on the higher points of evasion. Not in any way that really matters, but I did want to note that going from no evasion to 1 evasion is like a doubling of your potential evasion. You go from 10% to 20%, and it gets smaller each time you step up further. Ultimately, you still just want as much evasion stacked as you can, so it's not a big deal, but I did want to recognise it for those of you who really love probability and maths. There is a little bit more to it than just get as much evasion as you can. You also need to think about cost versus potential gains, especially slot cost. Slots on your gear grid, huge deal. If we get past evasion, the monster has hit. Now, monsters get to cheat compared to survivors. They just skip the toughness roll, they deal damage. That is why we want all of these defenses, because we don't have the protection they have of a toughness score. This isn't like Warhammer Quest or some of the dungeon crawler where you have to roll to wound, and the monsters also have to roll to wound. No, the monster automatically wounds. Scary. Now at this point we've got a bunch of passive and active defenses that we can make use of. Our very first one to consider is block. Block needs to be triggered and set up, and you spend survival to get it going, surging to put block up or similar. Because you have to actively use it, you want to be thinking about it before anything else, because it's, do I need this block, do I not need this block? So that's the very first decision to make. After that, we've got deflect. Deflect is a fire and forget. In other words, you activate deflect and you get the deflect tokens, and you can just not worry about it until you take the hits. So that makes it a lot stronger than block. And beyond that, we now have passive rolls. For example, we have it down here. Ripple pattern from the Century shoulder pads. The 10% chance of ignoring one hit can be improved here. So that is another great little layer. Our last layer on those kind of defenses, active sort of passive defenses, is dodge. Dodge is that one which you chuck in after everything else because you want all of the other things to be used first. Dodge almost always requires a loss of survival, which is meaningful. You have a finite pool of it, so you're trying to pace yourself on your dodge and use it as little as you can. If all of that's failed, we're on to soak. Soak is a combination of armor points and injury boxes. And soak is the penultimate line to avoid dying, with just after that being ways that prevent severe injuries. So soak is your big important thing, and soak is why the tanks want to have the best armor points possible, because the more points of damage you can take without suffering severe injuries, the longer you can stay up, and the less chance you have of getting into unfortunate situations where you desperately need someone else to take a hit because you've lost all of your armor. Now, one of the key things to note about soak is your head and body are more vulnerable than anything else. The head, because it has one less soak point naturally, it's only got a heavy injury, and it's a 40% chance of dying on the head. And the body, because it has two faces on the dice, that means you're twice as likely to get hit in the body, and if you invert that, it means the body is going to take twice as much damage over a showdown than anything else. So the body slot, if you want to think of it, it essentially has half the armor points that anything else does, or half the armor points spread around the dice face that anything else does. So body and head hits are the kind of things you want to be preventing more than anything else if you can, but it's always a case-by-case basis. Then, as mentioned, we have our final barrier. That is items that prevent, or even armor cards sometimes, that prevent death or prevent severe injuries. And they're very useful, but as a last resort, they tend to be quite clunky in that they don't have any affinities, and sometimes they don't even have any other abilities at all, so they're just there and they're covering the worst case scenario. Really, as a good tank, you should not be getting to the point where you're taking severe injuries, but if sometimes it happens, especially when fighting a higher level monster than you're normally comfortable with, or a new monster, these things can help. Dried Acanthus is one of the best, because it gives you +2 survival when departing, and it's very cheap, so you don't mind it being used up. The life potion from the Gorm prevents death specifically, but doesn't prevent any other severe injuries. It doesn't have any affinities though, which kind of holds it back a lot, because as mentioned, your slots are really at a premium as a tank. Okay, so that's a bunch of things to be thinking about during the showdown. The last piece is just learning how to handle your weapon proficiency advancement. Shield should be the one that you're pushing to use, but obviously you can't start doing that until you have shield. So there are a bunch of weapons that are great for tanks, and we're going to talk about them. But before we get there, I'm going to come down to here, because I want to talk about the concept of when to go for higher monsters. So we're going to talk a little bit about armor point scaling. We're going to get into a few very simple examples. In fact, I'm going to grab one particular card to help us out with these examples. Here we go. Right. So, how do you know when you're ready to step up to the next monster? On the weapon side of things, it's usually your weapons have at least a 50% chance of wounding the monster when you attack, preferably 60%. So you're looking at weapon strength plus survivor strength versus the monster's toughness to work out if you're ready for that step up. Also, you have to consider things like grab, claw, cunning, cunning, or the Phoenix is like blowing you backwards as a part of its basic action. So dash quite often becomes a signpost that you're ready to move on to bigger monsters. You can go earlier. I'm going to talk about things in the most cautious way possible here. As a tank, you should be thinking about caution. We're going to get to some crazy go nuts stuff when we start talking about damage dealers, so don't worry. But for now, we're looking at the most cautious side of things. Okay, claw. Let us take a very simple example. We've got a white lion that does claw every turn. We've got a naked survivor. So, our naked survivor has 9 soak boxes. That's 5 heavy and 4 light. It only has 1 on the head. So we know that the fastest time to kill for the monster is 2 hits. Heavy injury to the head, severe injury to the head. It can do that in 1 card if we don't provide any forms of resistance like dodge, etc. Against the body, its time to kill is 3 hits. It was light injury, heavy injury, and then now we're rolling for potential death. So that means the time to kill on all the other locations is 3 hits or 1.5 AI cards. Additionally, longest time for the monster to hurt is a total of 10 hits. If you got really fortunate and you're able to spread out the attacks across all of the locations, you could soak up to 9 damage before you're guaranteed to be taking a potentially lethal hit. So our shortest time to kill is 2. Our longest time to kill is 10. That's a basic survivor. Now what happens when we have a full set of rawhide on? That gives us 2 armor in all locations. Suddenly body and all of those have 4 soak and the head has 3. So if we look at our time to kill, we can see that the head is now 4 hits. First hit, remove armor. Second hit, 3 hits. Third hit, severe injury. Okay, the body is 4 hits. So first hit, 1 armor. Second hit, 1 armor. Third hit, heavy. A light. Fourth hit, heavy. And then, boom, you're out. Potential kill shot. So we can see that that's pretty effective. Rawhide is adding, especially to the body and all of those locations, a lot more durability. On top of that, it's 10 armor points. So that means now we have a total of 19 potential soak. So Rawhide, even ignoring how it gives you extra evasion and survival, has suddenly more than doubled the durability of a survivor. Now if we then take this thought experiment and we move forward to Rawhide Survivor versus a level 2 White Lion doing claw every turn. Now it's got 3 speed, but really significantly for our example, it's dealing 2 damage a hit. So we now look at Rawhide and we look at the head and 2 damage, that's okay. First damage goes straight to heavy injury, second damage, potential death. Okay, our time to kill is 2 hits. That could be 1 AI card. On the body, it's removes all armor on the first hit, heavy on the second hit, and then on the severe injury table on the third hit. So suddenly we've got a time to kill of 2 and 3, which is it's like we're naked again. We're barely better off than the naked survivor was against the level 1 White Lion. So we can see that while Rawhide might help if we're not getting hit all of the time, it isn't going to do the job if we're taking the vast majority of the hits. We need to support that further with extra defenses and more soak. So if we go to leather, and leather has a bunch of extra benefits. It has can give you +2 evasion if you combine it with the shield, etc. But if we just look at the pure soak on leather, and we got our leather armor set here, we've got 4 in each location. So the head now has 5 soak total, which if we're chunking down by 2 each time is 3 hits to potential kill. And then on the body, the time to kill is 1 higher. So first hit, it puts down to 2 armor, second hit 0 armor, third hit heavy, fourth hit potential kill. So that gives us a good way of working out if our armor is strong enough. It's not hidden information what the monster's basic kind of stat line is, and you can figure out like Node 1 monsters tend to deal 1 damage at level 1 and 2 damage at level 2 and then 3 damage at level 3, but they will scale more wildly at level 3. And Node 3 level 1 monsters tend to be close to a Node 2 level, a Node 1 or 2 level 2 monster, if I haven't garbled all of that up. So in essence, we can judge a little bit how good our armor is going to be on its own. But also, we're going to be adding more tools the further up we get, and shield does a big part towards keeping you alive longer. Active monster grease does a lot. That's all fantastic. But I did want to talk about how you can start thinking about soak, and it's a lot easier when you write it down than read it out loud. But if you can easily sketch down how good is my armor going to be against 1 damage per turn, 2 per hit, 2 damage per hit, 3 damage per hit, and you can figure out how many hits will take you out, and then you can roughly compare the armor sets to earlier ones. So what we can see is that like Rawhide's amazing versus a level 1 White Lion. It is not great against a level 2 White Lion. Certainly not great for the tank without additional support. But leather armor is about as effective on a pure soak level against the level 2 White Lion as Rawhide was against the level 1. You with me? I hope I made sense. I know I garbled things up a little bit because reading out all of the number drops can get a bit messy, but hopefully I've made sense. Okay, on to the settlement phase then, and this is where we're going to talk about armor sets and things like that. Now, first of all, in the settlement phase, you should be taking charge of crafting of armor sets. Your domain as the tank is shields and armor sets. You are desperate to get the first shield possible. As soon as there is a shield available, you should be demanding that it is crafted, because just any kind of shield is a huge increase in power, because suddenly you can block every turn, and you can even block and dodge, so you can cancel a lot of potential hits. You should also be the first person getting a new armor set as the settlement steps up to higher tiers, because you are very much the defensive scaling. Damage dealers should be concentrating more on weapons. So all that means is, when it comes to settlement phase, it is really helpful for you to sit down with everyone else and say, okay, I'm going to take charge of crafting armor sets and shields. When it comes to weapons, you guys on damage, you can be ahead of that, and support if you have one. You can do the selections for items. All I require on that front is I require a monster grease right as soon as possible to help with my defenses, but that's the only times that I override you, in either of you, is getting that first shield or getting that better shield and getting that monster grease. When it comes to weapon types, there are 6 main types that you're going to use most of all, but I've got a few extra examples. The big one is, of course, shields. Not suffering collision, that's really helpful, but this is the big thing. Add 1 to all hit locations, and then the mastery allows you to protect people by swapping positions with them and taking the hit, and everybody gets this extra weapon proficiency. So this is your number 1 priority. Shields, they're more important than anything else. In the core game, we've got 3 shields. Round Leather Shield is your first stopping point. This is where you're starting to enter the mid-game. Once you have one of these, it makes a huge difference. It actually affects time to kill as well, quite significantly with this armor points. Scrap Shield is a good shield, but is unfortunately in the same crafting location as the Beacon Shield, which is way better. So you're only going to make the Scrap Shield if you are looking to get extra armor points layered up. You need this red affinity, or you've just not scraped together enough materials to build the Beacon Shield yet. Beacon Shield is one of the best shields in the game still. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's upgradable in People of the Lantern as well. So this is generally one of your final destinations, but we will look at a few other options that can crop up that are quite interesting. So shields, your number 1 priority. Next up, we have axes. Now the advantage of axes is, first of all, if you're attacking and your wound attempt fails, you can attempt to wound the selected hit location again, ignoring the failure. That's great. That means when you are attacking, you're not attacking with failures and trading your defenses, your armor points for no progress. But really significantly, Axe Masters get to critical wound persistent injury locations automatically. That means you can bypass reactions entirely and get a beneficial wound that cripples the monster as well. So very strong and very, very useful. Some great axes in the core game. We've got Counterweighted Axe, which does everything you want as a tank. It's got reach, so you can attack from being on a corner rather than directly in front of the monster, and it can deal wounds without drawing a hit location. Amazing. Plus, it's got 4 strength. We like 4 strength. That's a good strength number for the mid-game. We do want to bolster it with some survivor strength, but still very solid. The Lantern Glaive is another all-time star. It has spear, so that actually means if you've got Spearmaster in your settlement, if you hit the trap, you have a chance of not suffering the punishment for it. That's great. It's still an axe, amazing, and it's got 4 strength plus sharp, so effectively, on average, 9.5 strength, so 9 to 10 strength for an average roll, which is great. Early iron, that sucks, but you actually don't mind if your attacks cancel and miss. That's better than hitting and not wounding. Plus, you can get a polishing lantern to overcome this. It's a superb weapon. Great for tanking. Okay, now our next one is clubs. Clubs are interesting because it's not just their specialization and mastery that do the job. It's also some of the club designs help you with tanking. So if we just get into the card first, on a perfect hit you double your wound attempt. That's really nice, okay? Wounding's just good. You just want to be wounding. And then on the flip side of this, if you successfully wound with a total equal to or twice the monster's toughness, you inflict an additional wound. Getting a wound like that extra without having to roll to draw and roll for toughness, draw hit location, roll for toughness, is really strong. It's effectively devastating 1. That's really nice to have. These are some good examples of clubs. Bone Club is amazing because you can craft it very, very early on and you can use it for the rest of the campaign because of how Lantern Armor has synergy with clubs. So this is a really good expenditure of 3 bones, even with the cumbersome downside. You can get around that in a lot of different ways as a tank. So this is fantastic. These 2 are amazing abilities on bad stats. So they tend to come into play once you get to Lantern Armor, where they also get sharp to make their strengths viable. But they both have this little bit of extra AI control. This is great for you. You can like, oh, I don't want this AI card, and you stick it to the bottom of the deck, deal with it later. And this reducing monster speed by 1 is incredible. Just like nerfs part of the monster speed, gets them down to that base level of 1. Grand weapons are an all-time classic for tanks. The extra accuracy is nice, but what we really care about is this control of knocking the monster down. That means its reactions are disabled. At mastery, on a perfect hit, you get to cancel all reactions. That's incredible. The knockdown ability is a bit less effective against indomitable monsters, but it's still great to get a knockdown. When it comes to grand weapons, the Zanbato is our classic. This is one of the best weapons for cost in the entire game, even though now it costs a perfect hit. It does everything you want. It's like the archetypal grand weapon. It's got low speed, so it's controlled. It's got okay accuracy, so you can reliably hit with it. It's got good strength. You can rely on it scoring wounds. It has deadly, meaning sometimes it bypasses the monster's reactions by scoring a critical wound. And it even has devastating 1, so it can inflict additional wounds without having to draw hit location cards. So this is, if you ever want, somebody says, what's like the archetypal offensive tank weapon? The Zanbato or the counterweighted axe are your easy go-to classic examples. We've got a couple of others just to highlight them. The Scleaver from the Sunstalker. This is a super interesting weapon because actually it isn't slow, so it has other things you can do with it. But it is really cool. Perfect hit, devastating, just great stats. The only negative of this is it doesn't have sharp, so it falls off once you get quite far in, but this will wound 15, 16 toughness pretty reliably. And then we have the Dragon Slayer from the Blacksmith location. It's still frail, meaning you do need to be a little careful with it, but with 1 speed that's not a massive deal. It has a really high strength total with sharp and this, so sharp basically means you're adding about 10 to your average wounding roll, so 19 is roughly what this is doing. And it's got 2 affinities it can help builds with that it doesn't need itself. So grand weapons are fantastic. Katars are great in the early game for tanking. They fall off not because they're bad, they're not. The specialization, cancel reactions of first selected hit location, we love that. And perfect hits giving us evasion, we love that as well. The reason they fall off is that in the core game, we have very few Katars. Line Beast Katar is in essence the only Katar that's really of note. The Beast Knuckle is kind of mediocre compared to the Lion Beast Katar because this Deadly is amazing and tanks love Deadly. So you might be tanking with a Lion Beast Katar early on, which means you're playing more of an off-tank role before you settle into being a full tank. But in the early game, all survivors have to generalise a bit more. Digging Claw. This is just a great example of an end-game Katar tank weapon. It's slow speed, it's good accuracy, it's great strength. It upgrades to be a sharp one as well. Just one of these is phenomenal a tank, but there's other really good late-game Katars that you can keep an eye out for, such as from the Giga Lion, you can oxidize the Lion Beast Katars. Very powerful. Swords I want to mention here briefly because as time has passed and more designs have come out, there has been a push towards making swords the attack and defend weapon, such in parrying, you know, that kind of parry system, parry with a sword. It's not super good within the first generation, but it is getting better in later releases. This ability is also pretty good because you get to make your wound roll and then afterwards select the hit location, so you can line up your wound roll with a hit location that doesn't punish you. The mastery, it's fine. It's fine for a tank, you're not super bothered with it, although being a sword master with a black sword is like incredible for a tank. I wanted to just show the blast sword. This is a good example of a weapon like the sword defensive thing they're trying to put together. The only reason the blast sword is bad is it really should be a lot higher on the strength. I'd honestly ask for double strength on this weapon, even if it costs more resources to make, in order to make it worthwhile. I should be able to use a blast sword against a level 2 Dragon King with a reliable chance of wounding. I can't right now, but this is the design that they're gradually improving on, and I actually really like this weapon in blood paint builds, which I'll talk about in the Bruiser article. Okay, whips. Whips are similar to swords. They have a really good design for tanking. This provoke ability appears on whips only at the moment. In the first generation, exclusively on whips. The issue is sometimes the strength is too bad, like Rawhide Whip strength is so poor, and there's not deep progression. In the core game you've got 3 whips, one of which is upgradable in the end game, but you can't really be tanking with a whip, which is a shame, because this is a strong controlling ability, letting you prune the discard pile to remove scary cards that have been drawn against you, and this mastery of +5 strength, yes please, that's just basic, it's straightforward, but it's really good. So whips is something to bear in mind. As we get more and better whips, they may become a tanking weapon of choice. They have the design to do it. Last of all, the bow is here because of the Sunshark bow. This is Kingdom Death's Gun Lance, which if you haven't played Monster Hunter, Gun Lance is a combination of a gun and a lance, hence the name. If you get all of this active, then it's a slow melee weapon that you can hit the monster with up close and personal, like right in the face, which I love. It's a bladed bow. It's really sweet design. It's my favourite weapon in the entire game, bar none. I love this, and this is my tanking weapon of choice because it gets all of the melee synergies, all of the range synergies, all of the bow synergies, while also being a close quarters weapon. It also means not only can you get specialization to reroll your misses, that's nice, you can also have Deadly 2 on your bow, which is phenomenal for a tank. We love having Deadly because then we get to bypass reactions and on critical wounds. So that is our general kind of weapon types. We'll look at a few more examples when we get to expansions, but for now let's get on to another big important thing, and that is the Organ Grinders items. Here we are. We have 3 items of note. First up, Monster Grease. Monster Grease is our signature item. It ties us nicely into the green side of affinities. +1 evasion for 2 organs is great, and it scales to the late game. The only thing to really pay attention to on top of that is it being flammable, meaning you probably need to be very careful if you bring it against things that burn, like the Sunstalker. What's more to say, Monster Grease is so good it had its cost doubled and it's still really good. Stone Noses, these are nice early on. They give you survival and brain protection. So that's pretty solid, and it's also a regain on arrival. So even if you've lost it all on the hunt phase, arriving at the showdown will give you at least a little bit of this stuff. And also it's cheap to make. It costs an endeavour. Just go out and pluck those noses off the faces in the ground. Finally, Monster Tooth Necklace, really helpful for us if we're levelling up a shield with bad strength, which is often the case. Levelling up proficiency is difficult. And this can help, and having that extra strength is pretty fantastic. And sometimes this red affinity here is relevant, and we'll look at that. Okay, so armor sets. We start with the same armor set that is best for everyone early on, and that's Rawhide. Rawhide has a lot going for it. It provides you with enough protection to tank most of what level 1 node 1 monsters are doing, and it actually still holds up against level 2 node 1 and 2 monsters fairly well, as long as you're not the main tank. It also gives you evasion, which we love. It gives you survival on departure. Everyone loves that. It gives you AI control, so if the monster gets out of position, you can manipulate its AI to get it to come back to you, or get it away from somebody, or even just give people info. So that's quite useful. And why early tanks often play a hybrid tank support, maybe even tank support damage dealing build, the kind of jack of all trades, before focusing down. And last of all, getting a survival refund is amazing because, well, hey, more dodges. Fantastic, more dashes. Just a really good starting armor set. Your first Rawhide set is worth an absolute ton. Incredibly efficient, massive value. And you will wear it until you're ready to hand it on to somebody else. Then after that, in the core game, we get to leather armor. This is our progression to the mid game. Leather armor is incredible because it's in the same location as the round leather shield. We really like that, and it has this synergist build with monster grease being active, and it has ignores bash. So this is our next step as a tank, and then we'll tie that in with a weapon of some kind, either counterweighted axe we can put here, or if we're lucky we can put a Zambato in here. Or whatever else takes your fancy out of the various weapon types that you're enjoying using and remains effective. There's not much more to say. Leather armor is pretty cheap. It's generic costs, and it is what you personally should be pushing towards once you've gotten Rawhide sorted. Finally, our great end game example in the core, just the core locations, the base locations, is Lantern Armor. Lantern Armor has a ton of armor points. You can see this adds 3 to all hit locations of metal armor when it's fully active, which it is like this. It makes clubs even more accurate. It adds sharp to clubs, making them more powerful. It has earplugs, so you can be deaf if you need to, in order to avoid intimidate actions. That's very strong. Of course, being deaf, be aware in courage and other things, and you may be punished for being deaf at times. The helm's even upgradable, which is great. The weakest part is the lantern greaves. I've highlighted here 2 cheap items you may have crafted early on that you can put into this gear grid to give you this. You could put a scrap shield here instead if you wanted more armor points. Typically there'll be a beacon shield in one of these other slots. About the only major downside of lantern armor is it doesn't easily get to that 3rd green affinity. You sort of have to like break this up and create a space where you can put the affinities in together. That can be a bit of a problem. It's the design of the cross. That's just the way it is. If you have a cross armor set, it is awkward to do other things with it, but you get good power for that. Okay. Quick look at fighting arts and disorders. On the fighting art front, we've got a bunch that can be quite helpful. Unconscious fighter, self-explanatory. 7 bleeding tokens to kill you. Fantastic. You don't need to be bandaged as often. You can sit at like 3 or 4 bleeding tokens and be comfortable in most fights. So that's really nice. Otherwise, generally bleeding tokens, I'd often early on at least carry the bandages myself because the support may not be too close by. However, if they are a support that also deals damage and they deal melee damage or they use a spear or something, melee damage still, then maybe they'll carry the bandages instead just to free up your actions to keep going. But before I have a shield, I don't mind bandaging. Unconscious Fighter, though, is such a great fighting art, especially with the more bleed-heavy monsters, or ones like the Sunstalker, that at higher levels don't let you remove your bleeding tokens. Tough. +1 to severe injuries isn't great, but you don't really want to be taking severe injuries, but this sits in a fighting art slot, not in a gear grid slot. So as a consequence, you've got more justification for fitting this in, and it halves the chances of dying in every location apart from the head, where it reduces it by 25%. Amazing. Rhythm Chaser, an evasion token, as long as you're not using any heavy gear in your grid, and if you get knocked down, you'll remove all your evasion tokens. So unless you have an instrument, you don't really want to combine this with a Guitar Master, but this is great. You can stack this on top of Monster Grease, on top of Rawhide early on, and as long as you're not wielding a heavy weapon, you're in a good place. You'll get knocked down and losing the evasion token sucks, but using instruments that are noisy typically isn't worth the effort outside of Nemesis fights. So very good. Extra sense, dodge an additional time around. Expensive, but hey, it's extra dodges. Extra dodges is more hits cancelled. It's great. Cross-arm block. Moving hits to the arms is actually fairly good. Arms are less lethal than other locations. Often I'll move head or body hits to the arms if I have cross-arm block. You can even get some things that improve the amount of armor points you have on your arms even further. So this, while this isn't super powerful, it is something I would keep around on a tank. Finally, we have Crazed. Very straightforward. Get a perfect hit, gain insanity. This is a little bit of like healing for your brain. Quote unquote healing. So that's all them. When it comes to disorders, Immortal is the one that really matters to talk about. You cannot spend survival actions while insane. So that's a big downside. You can't dash cancel, you can't dodge, you can't encourage, etc. But you get to convert all damage dealt to your hit locations to brain damage. And there are ways of getting incredibly high levels of insanity. And also, survivors can help you keep your insanity topped up with, for example, the Screaming Helm. So this is a very powerful build. We'll look at a shield that supports this in a moment. But I think it's important to note Immortal is very strong. Yeah. We also have a few secret fighting arts I'd like to briefly reference. First up, Synchronized Strike. This one's very easy to get. The big thing here is you at the front can assist other survivors in the rear as long as they line up with you like this and give them bonuses, and they can even help you on the front. So this is a part of the music line of innovations. It's available there. It's very repeatable and easy to get, so something to keep an eye on, especially if you are struggling on the strength front. Very helpful. The Flower Knight has two incredible ones. Fencing. You can gain this while fighting the Flower Knight, so it's fairly reliable and easy to unlock, and it gives you this incredible ignore a hit, which is very strong. We don't see this on too many things, especially this level of ignore, 50%. Finally, we have the Acanthus Doctor, which gets armor points equal to their number of green affinities, and gains strength tokens as well, and they can even do a little bit of healing that they take themselves by spending flowers or fresh Acanthus. This is a build I will be talking about within later on in the archetypes. It's more of a bruiser style build, so I'll be going into it in detail there, but I wanted to mention it here. Last of all, of the saviours, green saviours, they're the ones who do your tanking. If you want a tank to hold the line for a while, you can grab a green saviour and they'll do a very good job. Okay, last of all, before we wrap this up, we're going to talk about expansions. Now here are survivors from the 4 most useful expansions for tanks, including, this isn't really an expansion, but it's a modular quarry monster. You may not have the Phoenix in, but yeah, Gorm, Phoenix, Spidiculus, and the Dungbooth Knight. Now there's a few others that will be in the thing as well, but let's talk about them. We'll start with the Gorm. So the Gorm has Steadfast Potion for helping with blocking. It makes you scale as you block. That's great for doing shield mastery. Riot Mace is like many other clubs. It'll go with Lantern Armor. It also has really good stats, has Deadly, and nerfs the monster's AI deck down to basic action. Very powerful. Rib Blade, perfect ground weapon. Amazing, cheap. We'll get to the armor set in a moment. Then we have Knuckle Shield. This is the earliest shield you can get at the moment. Incredibly good. Will totally nerf the Screaming Antelope into almost ineffectual levels. Like level 1 Screaming Antelope hates to see this. Greater Axe. It's an axe. Deadly. Range. Scales a little bit. Good strength. Nice affinity. Wow. Okay, and then we have Gormant Armour. So let's grab these out of the deck, including this. And we shall go visit our first time to the grid. So I am not going to take a huge amount of effort in building these properly, but I will highlight a typical layout if I remember. So Gormant Armour is our first potential tanking set. The negatives on this are it actually doesn't have enough armour points for the job. It only has 3 armour points to all hit locations. That's kind of not good enough, but you may wear this as a stopgap towards getting to leather. Especially if you're tired of playing with Rawhide all the time. Now, Gormant Armour's negatives, we'll start with those. It really demands resource affinities. It needs a lot of affinities. It is affinity hungry. And that is a bit of an issue, especially because its main ability, or 2 best abilities, they're not easy to activate at all. But on the positive sides, you can actually wear it as a 4-slot armour set. This is gained through the level 3 Gorm, so it's kind of an upgrade, and it will then increase the armour values to 4 across the board and 6 on the body, which is, it's not great for a tank, but that's not bad for a damage dealer or a bruiser type, at least for a while. It also has, as I mentioned, shield synergies, this is the best bit. Ignoring intimidate actions is amazing. This is moderately useful. This is good. Guard is awkward to use as a tank because you move 3 spaces directly away from the monster and you do get that free block, so you can attack and block, and it's really good with, say, the Knuckle Shield for doing that. Knuckle Shield's a classic with Gormant Armour. Leather Shield's also good because it'll sit here and sort that. But this moving backwards tends to mean other survivors may be struggling to keep you being targeted. There is a trick. You can stand another survivor directly behind you. Other survivors can move through you, but you don't move through them. So if you have, say, a ranged survivor or a reach survivor, they can block you to stop you retreating, and then you just attack, and then you try to move backwards and you can't. Super good. Lion Spear, the Lion Spear, the King Spear is a great example of that. So you can have a survivor with a King Spear standing behind you, and you're just you get in there with your shield attack. Maybe you're running the Steadfast Potion and Knuckle Shield together, and boom. That's all really looking good. And they get to deal consistent damage without worrying about being targeting. In fact, we have it here, so let's just really quickly show you. There we are. See. That's quite nice, and then we can just put something else here to get that green, and we can put something up here to connect this blue, and that's fairly reliable. The other thing is you do get this ability to ignore when you suffer multiple severe injuries. That's not super great, but it is nice to have. So the main thing that holds Gormant Armour back is its armour points. They're not quite good enough for tanking. Really, it needs, I would say, a leather tier of armour points baseline, so 4 in all locations, going up to maybe 6 on the full armour set rather than going up to 4. But it's an interesting armour set. It's one that I'm fond of despite of its flaws. So let's pop it over here. Good job. Next up, Silk Armour and Spediculous Gear. So first up, weapons. Amber Poleaxe, Axe Spear. It's expensive, this. You probably don't craft it if you've got access to axes from the Gorm, or you've got access to the King's Spear from the White Lion. But if you don't have either of those, this is pretty solid, and this little extra free wound thing is quite decent as well. Amber Edge, not a bad weapon to use in addition to your shield, because it's slow, it's reliable, it's got good strength. Be aware that it'll keep chopping and chopping. This isn't optional. You're going to have to keep doing this if you wound the monster. But the absolute worst happens is you just cut your way into something that ends your attack. So I think this is a nice option, although I prefer this on a survivor who is looking to level up Fist and Tooth rather than shield. We'll skip the armor set for a moment. Let's look at these three. So these are the big hitters. Silk bodysuit. You can craft this with resources gathered from level 1 Spediculuses. Is nuts. It's so powerful. Reduce damage from every hit suffered by 2 to a minimum of 1, as long as you don't have heavy or metal armor. Well, guess what? Leather isn't heavy. Leather isn't metal. And 2 armor points per hit, 2 damage per hit reduced is absolutely bonkers. And this will even stack with other forms of damage reduction. And we have one that will work alongside it. So this is just such a bonkers good card. Green ring. When you attack each round, gain 3 armor points to all hit locations. Stupidly busted, incredibly powerful. Even if you're not abusing it with with monster controller manipulation via the Gloomhammer, you're still gaining 15 armor points every 4 turns. Really powerful. The blue ring is potentially more powerful than the green ring because it lets you just discard one particular AI card whenever you're targeted. This can let you avoid legendary cards, and one of the big things about fighting the higher level monsters is getting rid of their legendary cards. This is a buffer against that. It's also every single time you are the monster controller and you're targeted, you just get to experience the attack that you most want to out of 2 options. Very, very, very powerful. Whoops, I need to grab these. So, Silk Armor. Silk Armor is nearly an incredible tanking set. Let's grab all the bits. Excuse me. There we go. Right. Okay, so you're going to take a moment just to lay it out in a okay layout. So if we just put this to here. Right, so this is one of the more typical tanking layouts. Got a bunch of really useful things here. First of all, extra survival when departing. Secondly, activated abilities that will give you more armor points. This is also very strong, but you tend to have to make a decision between activating the sash or the boots. It's difficult to do both in the same build. You can see that if we just jig things around a little bit, we can get there. Like we can put this up here, we can put this here, we can put this here, we can slide this down to here and here, and then hopefully we can activate the turban. Oh, sorry, my bad. There we are. Yeah, like this. And we can easily get another green in here to complete this. We kind of lose this. I don't mind that with Silk Armor. That's all fine. It's interesting that it's impossible to do completely. You have to kind of compromise or find a very specific loadout to cover various bits and pieces. And it has a great ability that lets you change one of the hit location dice to a result of your choice, which is amazing. This is such a good tanking ability because you get to channel the monster to the best location for you on one of its hits. Just should be a top tier tanking set. The only reason it isn't is that for some reason the Silk Turban requires a strange resource that you can only get by killing the level 3 Spediculus. If it was the level 2 Spediculus, that would be fine. If it wasn't on there at all, that would also be fine, and I would be praising this armor set. So the problem with this is just by the time you can craft it, you're sort of in a portion of the game where you're past wanting it, even though it has some very powerful and unique abilities. So often you'll just find Silk Armor is used in kind of a... what's the best way to describe it? It's like piecemeal in mixed sets for people who are leveling up. But don't forget, if this gets a good bit of love, not a lot, just a little bit of love from Team Death in Campaigns of Death, this is going to start being an armor set that we're talking about a lot when it comes to tanking. Let's pop this over here, and we'll pop this over here, and we'll get rid of this. Okay, next up I actually have Phoenix Armor, and I put this here as well. This isn't supposed to be here. Let's grab this for a moment. So this is from the White Giggle Iron. This is, if you're wearing fur, you can reduce all damage suffered by 1 to a minimum of 1. This doesn't even care about hits. This does all of it. So this is really strong. This will combo with, on top of some of the other bits and pieces. So that is such as Silk Bodysuit, or even the, actually this particular armor set here, which is not Phoenix Armor. I have the wrong thing. There we go. It's Brawler Armor. Surprise! Yeah, Phoenix armor comes afterwards. Can you let me put this down, please? Thank you. There we go. I can't drop this card on here, which is actually a nice bit of protection. Good coding. Right, okay, so Brawler Armor. Brawler Armor is one of these weird little ones. It's going to take me a moment to put together. It is a hybrid armor set from the Lion Knight, and while it is technically an unarmed set, what it actually is a really good tanking set, because it has 4 armor points to all locations, and it actually has the lion skin cloak, which will reduce every damage from every hit by 1 to a minimum of 1, and we can even put this on here somewhere, and make a more effect. Whoa, go back down there. Sorry, there we go. I want you locked. Thank you. Yeah, and just have a solid build. Like, this is nice, extra movement with this here, really great. So this is more of a damage negation, so the armor points are a lot higher than they actually look because of how damage negation reapplies on every single hit. So this is a very strong tanking build that's not too bad. You can construct it once you're starting to fight the White Lion, Phoenix, sorry, the Phoenix. And the White Giga Lion. You can get this extra if you own it, so that's pretty nice. This is like a solid option. Especially love that it uses the lion skin cloak. Okay, let's pop you over there. Right, now we have Phoenix. So on the Phoenix gear, first, whoa, okay, I don't know how I managed to make such a big move there. It's one of these days, I think. Right, there we are. So, Sonic Tomahawk is an axe. It's got great strength, good stats. You probably don't want to pair it as the tank, but you still love to use this and the additional attack rolls. It's less controlled than most, but it's good stats for an axe, so it can be a nice stopgap to get you before you get into Lantern Glaive. So I wanted to mention it. Come back to the armor in a moment. Here we are. We have 2 others to talk about here. I'll do Birdbred first. This can give you the priority target token and extra armor. On a 1, you'll reduce your survival to 0, so you typically want to run this when your survival is very low anyway. But this is like a great, oh no, everything's going wrong, panic button to have available. And this affinity here, right facing green, is quite rare and actually relevant for Phoenix armor. Feather Shield. Feather Shield is what I was talking about with Immortal. This is the shield for you. It's damage reduction. So that is really nice. And again, it's interesting because you're taking brain damage instead of normal damage as an Immortal, and this is just reducing that, so it's very useful. And finally, we have the armor set. Now, in broadest possible terms, I consider Phoenix armor to be a bruiser style set, but it can be used as a tank. If we just pop these down, right. And the reason for that is these 2 items here. +1 evasion, we love it. We love it. It's not as good as Monster Grease, but it can stack onto Monster Grease. And then the Phoenix Placard has one of the best abilities on any defensive piece of gear. If insane, ignore the first hit each round and suffer 1 brain damage instead. So you get to use your insanity as effective blocks, which is really great, especially once again if you have it combined with somebody or some way of replenishing your insanity, or you have a lot of insanity. Pop that over there, and we now have another Phoenix-based armor set. This is Warlord armor. Another favourite of mine. This is an axe-based armor set. It is, as you can see, the layout is a little bit better for the Phoenix Placard. This is quite hard to get active. You tend to have to sacrifice the placard, and I don't think that's worth doing. Amazingly now, you've actually got the Screaming Horns in concert with Phoenix Placard already, which works really well. On top of that, you get +1 speed and luck when attacking with axes. We like bypassing reactions, and this will bypass reactions, and it makes a great lead by the front kind of ability, where if you're the first person going, which often you will be as the tank because you kind of need to reposition to take into account how the monster's going to be acting, then boom, you boost in everyone else. Again, this set is probably a bit better as a bruiser set overall, but it absolutely can be a tank set, and it's got great defenses. Now we have, excuse me, thank you, the Dung Beetle Knight. Dung Beetle Knight has the Digging Claw, I already talked about that. It also has the Regenerating Blade that will become a really powerful grand weapon. You can upgrade the Zambato even further, removing Frail from it and improving its stats, which is also fantastic. But the armor set is the real big get here, along with this Errant Badge. +1 armor to all locations and tactics cards. Not going to go into too much detail. It's just armor. You love armor. Tactics cards it's nice to have more options. So if we just put all this down, I'll be very lucky to get this in a good orientation. I kind of did. It's okay. Right. So you have 4 armor points to all the hit locations. No, 5 armor points to all hit locations. When you calcify these, that scales up even further, getting to 9 armor points to all hit locations. Additionally, none of these pieces are armor, so you're not wearing armor, but you're benefiting from an armor set, and they are a good platform for holding things like the Rawhide Headband, which normally you wouldn't be able to carry into the late game, but you could do it here if you want to keep being the AI controlling tank support. Phenomenal armor set, but it's also just another generically good one, and even separate pieces of it will get used a lot by various different survivors. Just going to recognise this exists. Green armor is an amazing tanking set, but it's also an amazing offensive set. It's just incredibly powerful. Right, that was a bunch of expansions of interest. So to bring them back to here, Gorm, Spediculus, and Dung Beetle Knight, and then of course the Phoenix provides some good tanking options as well, and the White Lion and Screaming Antelope add the final pieces for our hybrid armor sets. Our last little things then. First of all, People of the Lantern only. These kind of weapons and armor are really good for you oxidized. Deflect tokens, armor points, good stats, sharp, reach, particularly more strength, good weapon type. Has deflect built on it. This is the sword and board style I was talking about before. So this is really good for you as a tank because you can compress your deflect and sword into one spot. But to be honest, you're probably still using a shield. So this kind of maybe gets better when you're using it with blood paint. Oxidized Ring Whip brings back Provoke and has decent stats now. So that's really good. Oxidized Lantern Helm gives you death, all the benefits of death with none of the downsides. This can actually be used with other metal-headed armor sets like Phoenix. And then we have a few other interesting oddities. Right, Steel Shield. Sometimes you will get this from encountering the Cyclops Knight in the finale hunt event. It's very heavy, but getting it early means you can score a bunch of easy progression on your weapon proficiency, so that's really nice. And this is super dodge. Yeah, spend an action or survival to ignore one hit. This is way better than block. This is way better than dodge. So this -3 movement is very significant. 2 movement is a horrific amount of movement to have. But as a tank, you can kind of direct the monster around a bit to come back to you, or ask someone to do that. Fetosaurus, just a really good shield. This is an upgraded beacon shield. This is used in green armor, but you can build it separately. Block 2, so there's a beacon shield there. Really good strength, affinities, and reduces all of these star effects, which is pretty important. Most intimidate scale by using the star, which is monster level. Hazmat shield, just another alternative offensively statted beacon shield, only appears in People of the Stars. And Prism Mace, People of the Sun, a very good two-handed defensive / offensive weapon that tends to sit in the middle of your gear grid and provide a big old centerpiece. There are, of course, many more things, and I can't even talk about the stuff that's in the gambler's chest that you would use because it's not on the simulator yet. But ultimately, I hope, now we're approaching the 1 hour and 25 minutes mark, that I've covered a bunch of things that can help with tanking, some concepts, some examples, some highlights, and from this you can take this and go off to your own games and tables and innovate and expand further, and maybe even come back in the comments and tell me, hey, guess what, fan? You could also do this, or I like to use this. Especially if there's got any Gambler's Chest stuff, love to hear about that, or the new Black Knight gear. Hold off on the Frog Dog gear, though, guys. My Frog Dog hasn't arrived at time of recording, hasn't been shipped yet, but hopefully it's with me by the time this video goes out, fingers crossed. Until then, for all of you tanks out there, I salute you and happy hunting.